Hello, and welcome to And Still We Rise, Uniting Women for Change, a podcast series by Churches for Middle East Peace, or CMEP. I'm your co-host, Destiny Magnet, coming to you from Boston.
Alongside Tamar Haddad, sharing from Jerusalem. Each episode, we bring you the voices of American and Palestinian women as they share their stories and insights on peace building, spirituality, and current events, including the bombing of Gaza.
Get ready to explore the depths of the Palestinian struggle, learn about the forms and features of American solidarity, and draw inspiration from the unity and resilience of these incredible women.
Disclaimer: the views expressed are those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent CMEP.
Hello and welcome to today's episode. Our first guest today is Sharon Harper. Sharon Harper is the founder of Freedom Road, a consulting group dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap. A sought-after speaker, trainer, and consultant with a large social media following, Harper has written several books, including the critically acclaimed The Very Good Gospel: How Everything Wrong Can Be Made Right. Her work has been featured in world-renowned news outlets. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
And our second speaker for the day is Joyce Ajlouny, who is the General Secretary of the American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, and a Quaker leader who is committed to help bring peace and justice to oppressed and vulnerable communities globally. Joyce has 30 years of nonprofit management. A Palestinian American, Joyce started her career working in international development in Palestine, focusing on minority and refugee rights, gender justice, economic development, and humanitarian support. She held leadership roles at Oxfam Great Britain, UNDP, UNFPA, and AIDA. Thank you both for being here and welcome. So, you both are considered public figures or women leaders who held very important roles at either Freedom Road or AFSC. So, my question to you is, what is the role that you hold in terms of bringing justice and peace to the Holy Land, especially now under the current circumstances? Joyce?
For me, the role of bringing peace and justice to the Holy Land is very personal. As you know, I'm a Palestinian American. I lived in Palestine for the first 47 years of my life. And so I bring my lived experience to this work. So my family roots to the land extend centuries, and the stories of my ancestors inform that connection to the people and to the land. So there is a unique role that I believe I bring as a Palestinian American. But as in any country undergoing conflict and oppression, the roles of individuals in leadership roles is to really, for me, always seek the truth, and that where we source that truth is very critical. As AFSC works in a multitude of countries around the world, we always say that we need to always lift up the voices and the solutions of the people who are struggling. We want to decolonize our approach for doing peace and social justice work. And our role is to accompany people through real deep solidarity, because the people struggling have answers, and our role is to help them achieve their goals towards justice and peace. And I think that we have another role is by lifting up the voices of those struggling in Palestine, especially these days. We see that our role is to bring into light the root causes of those decades-long systemic issues that are the cause of the injustice. And I think that we often hear about the present atrocities and the situation in Gaza as if it all started on October 7th. And our role at AFSC, since we've been in Gaza since 1948, we were asked to establish the first refugee camps there after the Palestinian Nakba. So we know that the roots, and we've been there since, right? And so we know that the roots are really around the continued apartheid and occupation and ethnic cleansing that has been endemic for the past 70 some years. And so, and our route is to lift up those root causes and the voices that have been suppressed for so many years. So I think that's in a nutshell what I feel our role is, to use our leverage also within our Quaker constituencies, within our faith community, to ensure that we exert the pressure that we need to exert on our government, on our policymakers, for change and diplomacy to take root.
Lisa.
Thank you, Joyce. I would agree with that, and I mean I think that for Freedom Road, our role is very very specific and narrow in this second Nakba that we're experiencing, or ongoing Nakba. I think Freedom Road is a U.S.-based organization with consultants and people who are working with us around the world. Um, uh, and by no means do we count ourselves as experts in this conflict. And yet, I do have personal interaction with people, not only of Palestinian descent here in the US, and friends who have been very, very helpful for me to begin to understand this conflict on a personal level, but also I had the great honor of traveling to Bethlehem, I believe it was back in 2018, and speaking at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference. I believe I was the first ever African American to speak at that conference, which was kind of amazing to me to imagine that, since our plights are so tied together. We are experiencing brutality from the same source. And so therefore, the source has common MOs, modus operandi, that were used against us, that are being used against them. And there are other modus operandi that are used particularly with indigenous peoples around the world by this common source. And for that, I'm talking about settler colonization. And so because our work is to shrink the gap in our narratives, and there's such a huge gap, particularly in the church in the United States, with regard to understanding what has happened, not just in Gaza, but in Palestine and Israel, since the acquisition of that land and the removal of Palestinian people. Our work has been to help shrink the gap among the masses in particular. So we use social media a lot, and it's our work, and it's been our work for many years, to show up and be present, to bear witness. And so our presence has been there, present in the midst of protests, prayer vigils, and educational sit-ins.
That's amazing work. And following up on that, I'm really interested, Lisa, if you could tell us more about these connections between shrinking the narrative gap and solidarity, and how can we draw connections between liberatory movements around the world, everything from Black Lives Matter to Palestinian liberation to a number of other causes. And how does that show up in your work? How is Freedom Road putting forth those kinds of ideas in your work?
Well, it's a really great question. I mean, I have my own podcast, Freedom Road Podcast. And over the years, one of the things that we have done on the Freedom Road Podcast is we talk about multiple issues. We bring in the people who are on the front lines of struggling with these issues, and they talk to us. And through those conversations, it's become very clear to me that we're all fighting the same demon. When we understand race, which is my own race and gender, which are my own personal demons that have haunted my own family and are outlined in my book Fortune, which came out in 2022, How Race Broke My Family and the World. When you understand that this thing we call race is simply a construct of human hierarchy, and it was created in order to privilege and entrench white male supremacy on stolen land, on land here in North America, in my context, right? So that is settler colonialism. And people of African descent were stolen from Africa, brought to the North American continent in order to work land for free in perpetuity to fill the coffers of Europeans who were colonizing this land. over time, with the Civil War and abolition, that same struggle has remained. It's just it's shapeshifted over the centuries. So it went from enslavement and slaveocracy to Jim Crow and peonage, which is free labor by putting people in prison, to environmental injustice, dumping toxins on people of African descent's land because they have very few rights and very, very little money to be able to fight it, right? So all of that is done in order to increase the coffers and protect the legal, political, social supremacy of white men. So that's our story. And it's the reason why so many people of African descent in the Americas have looked to the story of the Palestinians, and we feel empathy. We understand it on a cellular level, because we've been on the receiving end of that colonizing impulse from Europe. And some count the establishment of Israel, as necessary as it is to find space and place for people of Jewish descent to feel safe in the world, because all people should feel safe in the world. The reality is that the safety that they now enjoy is actually not safe. It's not safety. It's one of the most violent places on the planet. And it is also at the grave expense of an entire people group who was already there. And so while you can't say, according even to the biblical concept of shalom, you cannot say that one's peace can be gotten at the expense of another's peace. It just does not work that way. Shalom does not work that way. So our fates are tied together, as Dr. King said, in an inextricable tapestry of common destiny. And the only way for us to find peace, any of us to find peace, is for all of us to find peace. Therefore, Joyce's struggle, the struggle of Palestinian people, is my struggle.
Joyce?
Lisa, I love that. I just wanted to share. I remember when I was 17 and came to college in the United States. I was coming out of military occupation, and on campus, I was trying to find connection, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't connect to, the white American students who later became my very good friends. But at the beginning, I wanted that connection, and I found the connection in the African American population and students, because I felt like they were able to empathize with my story. They had an interest in my story, and they were able to connect. And so, for me, when we talk about solidarity, especially at this very dark moment in the Palestinian history, where we see that ongoing genocide and Nakba against our people, we have to hang on to hope, and where we can find hope. And where I have found hope is in the immense solidarity that we have seen. I was in DC a few days ago. There were massive amounts of people in that protests, and you watch the television and you see New York, and you see London, and you see the capitals of the world, and the people are on the streets, and that really it strengthens our resilience. It gives us hope that we're not alone. For so many decades, we did feel alone, and we felt our voice has continued to be suppressed. And while there is a silencing campaign linking anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and that so many people are speaking up and not allowing that campaign to take root, is everything. So for me, the support and the empathy leads to international awareness. It lifts up our struggle to the global scale, and then it leads to advocacy and pressure by the movement on the governments, and supporting boycott and divestment and campaigns, and pressuring our political leaders to work towards lasting peace. So the one group where their solidarity has meant the most to us as Palestinians has been the young Jewish activists from Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, and other groups that have come out and said, not in our name. And they have stood on the right side of history, lifting up our common humanity first and foremost, above politics, above everything else, and rooted their positions around the morality of the Israeli state and its actions today. So solidarity is everything, and it means everything to us when we see South Africa at the ICJ expressing solidarity in such a powerful way. And I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but that is solidarity. That is what it amounts to at the end of the day. It amounts to action and hopefully moves us towards peace and justice.
Lisa.
And I just want to add very quickly, Joyce, that there is another layer of this solidarity that people of African descent in the United States have experienced in partnership with people of Palestinian descent in Palestine, West Bank in particular. During the Black Lives Matter movement, which many people might already be aware of this, but I experienced it firsthand. When the Ferguson uprising began, when Michael Brown was killed, shot, left to bake on the street, a black tar street, for 4.5 hours after having been shot by an officer. And very soon after that, the police unleashed holy hell on the protesters, firing tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowds. Pastors were actually hit by some of those bullets. And the tear gas in particular was something that we had never it just wasn't something that we had experienced a lot of, probably since the 1960s in the US. And so on Twitter, Palestinian resistors began to tweet to and direct message Ferguson, hands up, don't shoot protesters, and teach them how to get the tear gas out of their eyes using milk. And so that became one of the things everybody always said, do you have your milk? Make sure you have your milk with you. And it was specifically because of the wisdom of years of resistance by Palestinian protesters who were protesting the IDF and IOF, who had exacted very similar techniques against them. And come to find out later that American police departments are often trained by the IDF in their military subjugation, military style subjugation in local United States municipalities. So our solidarity is not only spiritual or philosophical or in name, it's literally in struggle. It's the same forces that we're struggling against.
Lisa, you reminded me, it's not just all milk. I want to add something to your toolbox. It's also onions.
Oh!
Yes, take onions with you, and it will help, decrease the impact of the tear gas. I just want to say, I made a pilgrimage to Ferguson and to the site where Michael Brown laid and was killed. So that was very meaningful to me. I remember myself standing there and again feeling that connection. But these connections with at the American Friends Service Committee, I am so honored and privileged to see those connections with all sorts of people who are struggling. When we went down to the border in San Diego, and we did a direct action, civil disobedience action there to call for the rights of migrants. I felt that connection because I saw that wall, and I saw, it reminded me of the wall we have, the separation wall we have in Palestine, and how families are separated and they're not able to reach each other. When AFSC also, as part of our effort to lift up the voices from Gaza, we organized a tour for Ahmed Abu Rteme. Ahmed was sort of the mastermind behind the Great March of Return on the Gaza-Israel border every Friday, if you remember those nonviolent protests every Friday. So we brought Ahmed there, and we took him to the south, to the border with Mexico, and the conversations that he had there with the immigrant population was so powerful, and so connections happen everywhere, and we see ourselves as connecting movements together, because not only, as you said, do they build power from each other and learn from each other, they also share some tools of what has worked for them. And I love those interactions. And so I just wanted to add to that it's such an important part of our work is to ensure that these connections with people struggling everywhere remain our priority in how we go about our business and our organizations.
And I'll add, even this summer, I had the privilege of living and working with CMEP from Bethlehem this summer. And on the wall, there's portraits of George Floyd and Shireen Abu Akleh side by side. And I think it's such a beautiful illustration of the way that these struggles of people who are being subjected to colonial forces are coming together to fight for their liberation. And so thank you both for those incredible, incredible answers.
Joyce, I want to follow up. Like, I also lived in the States and I'm a Palestinian, and you mentioned something about not really connecting with all, like it was hard for me to connect with a white American, for example, and I'm being very honest, whereas it was so much easier for me to have a Black community because of that shared struggle. People who live similar types of struggles, you find them standing together for a bigger struggle. For example, right now we see how the Black community is standing in solidarity with Palestinians right now. We see South Africa leading the way. And Joyce, you mentioned something about decolonization at the beginning. And Lisa, you talked about the effect of colonization now. And I know you talk about it in your last book. But how do we get from that colonization that had effects, either racial prejudice right now or other things, but how do we get from that colonization to decolonization?
I think that decolonization, first you have to understand what is colonization. And then you have to understand what is settler colonization, because those are two different degrees of a very similar thing. And then we can begin to think about what is decolonization. So to colonize, very simply, is for one government or people group to grab and claim land and people on behalf of, for the benefit of, the colonizer. That's basically it. Settler colonization is when that colonizing force says it's not enough that we have control over the land. We want the land for our people. So then when you have settler colonization, the goal is to remove the indigenous people in order to make way for the colonizing people to come in and take the land. That happened in the United States with regard to Native people, indigenous people here. It happened in Australia, New Zealand, and other places like that, and Palestine. And so when we talk about decolonizing, what we're asking is, how do we decenter the European project or the colonizing project of having the world exist for the benefit of the colonizer? How do we decenter the needs of the colonizer, the desires, even the legal constructs of the colonizer, because those constructs were created to benefit that colonizer and entrench their power. So decolonization at its heart is decentering. And in my book, in terms of the faith, centering the image of God, centering the inherent dignity of all humanity and the inherent call of all humanity on the first page of the Bible to exercise stewardship of the world, to make decisions that impact the world. So what does it look like then to decolonize? It looks like to recognize that we all actually live in a circle, not on a hierarchical ladder. And we should all be asking the question of, how do we live together with equal weight around the circle?
I think it's so important to have understandings of these really big concepts and also recognize that we're seeing them play out in real time and in real people's lives, especially in Gaza right now. And so to take us to the current moment in our contemporary circumstances, Joyce, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what the American Friends Service Committee has been doing to respond to the crisis in Gaza and your work in Egypt on humanitarian aid, and just zoom us into today, January 17th, 2024.
Great. Would love to to do that. But also on the concept, because it's very important. What's different for us now is that the things that AFSC has been calling for the past decades are the same things we call for today. And so there's nothing new in what is happening other than the scale of it. And I think that We have been speaking against ethnic cleansing, we've been speaking against collective punishment. We have been speaking against the demolition of homes. We have been speaking against the imprisonment of Palestinians without charge or trial. We have been speaking against the blockade on Gaza, about the policies of counting calories of how much Gazans can eat, so they could, not die of hunger, but be on the verge of it. This has been ongoing, and I think that is the truth of the matter. And I think that what is, if you want the silver lining, it's hard to even call it that, in the midst of this horrific atrocities, is that the world is waking up to that truth. And I think to us, that is positive, that there is an awakening and a reckoning. And I think that is very positive. And so AFSC, we have been on the ground, as I said earlier, since 1948. We were asked, it was soon after we received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of Quakers around the world, along with our British friends. And because of the work that we did post World War I, feeding children, regardless of their ethnicity, we were called to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza, and we went there. The sad news is that we've been there since, and because we are needed. And so today we provide humanitarian aid to the offsprings and of the same people that we aided 70 some years ago. So AFSC has staff on the ground. We've had staff in Gaza for the longest time. And I just want to lift them up. Firas, Serena, Adham, they have been our heroes. And I can't say enough about what they've been doing. They all lost their homes, right? They're displaced themselves. They had to move, not once, not twice, not three times, many more times, to find safer shelter. And they are all in Rafah today. And they're trying to fend for their families, ensure that their children are safe, ensure that they have food and water. And they do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon, they go and do the humanitarian aid distributions on behalf of AFSC. And they send us pictures of the distribution. They send us pictures of wonderful activities they have with children, that they are trying to have them release some of their anxiety and the trauma that they've been enduring, and with some song and dance and whatnot. So AFSC, however, we do this all over the world. We have never in our history seen a humanitarian situation like this one, because it's, I always say that our toolbox for humanitarian aid is useless in Gaza because nothing is working. It's a collapse of the whole system. And so normally if there's an earthquake or if there's a conflict, something's working. If there's no electricity, there's food, or there's a way to escape and to seek refuge, to a safe place. But in Gaza, there's nothing. No food, no water, electricity, fuel, medical system, no education, no safe space, no possibility to escape and find refuge. And so, where do you even begin? And so it's been grueling. So what we have done, is what a lot of humanitarian organizations have done, is what we've set up an operation in Egypt. We have been procuring humanitarian aid on trucks, and we have been trying to get our trucks in through the Rafah entry point. But as you know, Israel controls what goes in and out. And the UN is saying Gaza needs 7,000 trucks a day to really meet the need of the people. Yet what is being allowed in is about 100 trucks a day. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and what goes in and what doesn't go in. And there's, a checklist, and they offload and upload and offload and upload. It takes forever to get basic foods in. And so while we are trying to get some of our trucks in, we know that it is a drop in the ocean, and what we're able to do is very, very minute. And that's why we have geared up our effort on the advocacy side here in the US, calling, along with so many in the movement, for a ceasefire. We have an action hour every Friday at noon, where a lot of our constituency members, Quakers, non-Quakers, people in the movement join, and we do a collective advocacy hour where we call together, we write together. And so I think we broke all the records in terms of how many letters were sent out to our policymakers during 3 months. Tens and tens of thousands of letters have been sent through that. And we support the movement. We are trying to lift up with research on genocide. We're trying to lift up with research on the weapons and how much we are sending weapons to Israel. And we have some research on that, and how the number of weapons that have reached Israel through us, through our government this year, has been at such an all-time high. As a Quaker organization, we always speak against supporting the weapon industry and the arms trade. But in this situation, we also feel that our government is complicit in the genocide that is taking place, because we continue to send weapons. And so we have a lot of actions calling our government to stop sending weapons and military aid to Israel, and we call our government to center diplomacy and nonviolent solutions, which we feel are the way to go in the state we're in.
I would love to hear a little bit about South Africa's ICJ case and whether you're hopeful, if you think it will spur change. I think it's a great representation of solidarity on the international organization level. And so I'd love to hear either of your thoughts on that. And then secondarily, you both attended the March for Gaza last week. We've heard a little bit of reflection on this already, but I would love to hear either of you talk a little bit about that experience. And Lisa, you also joined us for the CMEPS vigil afterwards, so maybe something from that. So for a final word, feel free to comment on either of those two pieces, and then we'll wrap things up.
Lisa.
The ICJ case is profound precisely because of the question of solidarity. There is a mechanism that most people were not aware of in the United Nations structures to begin to move a process forward to end this craziness. We all witnessed the United States veto a ceasefire several times. And most Americans, or I shouldn't say most, many Americans looked at that just incredulous. How could we say no to stopping a genocide, or at least an ethnic cleansing? But we did. And so it felt like there was no way forward. And with the Security Council, the way that it works, privileging European powers, and the General Assembly did say, we want to cease fire, but they don't have the teeth to be able to enforce it. So the question of the ICJ, that was a brilliant move on behalf of South Africa, because South Africa has experienced the apartheid that inspired the current level of apartheid in Israel today. The wall that was built was literally built inspired by apartheid in South Africa. And so when we ask the question of whether or not this is going to work, whether or not it's going to move things, it has already moved things. Never before that I'm aware of, never before have the Palestinian people had their case put before the entire world, and we all watched, or most of us watched. And it was an airtight case. It is a case that is not only logical and full of truth and fact and well documented, but it is the high moral case. And that is the shame of Israel, that their response was then to gaslight, to shrink the purview of focus so that we would only see what they want us to see as opposed to what they are doing. But because it's all out there now, for the first time, I think in 75 years, in such a clear way, the world now has a responsibility to decide whose side are you on. I mean, we can no longer say that we don't know. We now know because South Africa put that case forward. With regard to the march, I only just say this. I will say that the march has been underreported and underestimated. Most of the reporting has said thousands. And when you think of thousands, you think 1,000, 2,000, maybe 4,000 at the most, right? No, I was at both inaugurations for Barack Obama. I know what 1 million people looks like in the United States Capitol. I was at the Women's March. I know what 500,000 people looks like. I was at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. I know what 300,000 people looks like. And what we experienced last Saturday in Washington, D.C., in the March for Gaza, was no less than 300,000 people. It was absolutely comparable to what we experienced in the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And it's interesting that in the middle of the rally, no one could get anything out. There was a block on 5G, 4G. I don't know if you had 2 or 1G, didn't really matter. Wi-Fi. Nobody could get any messaging out. And my phone actually said I had 5G and all 5 bars of my cell phone, and still I could not get anything out. That was an intentional block of the messaging that day. So I've never seen anything like it where a march didn't have numbers broadcast, not clear numbers broadcast afterwards. And then the numbers that are broadcast are so far from what those who were there experienced.
Joyce?
I just want to say a little bit about the ICJ and what it means. For me, we have seen how a lot of the multinational institutions have failed us. A genocide is happening live on our phones, and this is month number 4, and it's still ongoing, and with vetoes and whatnot, it's not stopping. And so I think that the ICJ is very important and significant because it's also giving power to global South countries like South Africa to say that, you know what, we're not going to succumb to your hegemony, and that, we also have power. And we also have power. And I think they're breaking that silence, that cycle, by demonstrating that the global South can actually make a difference. And so my hope is that this will take root. I know that it's going to be a while until they actually have a verdict on whether this is genocide and or not. But I think there are some provisional measures that can be put in place soon. And I'm hoping that at least they can stop the ongoing onslaught. What I wanted to also share is what is the disappointment we've had with organizations and with governments is so deep that I wonder sometimes if this was allowed in 2023 and 2024, then we're setting a new standard, aren't we? Around how, what is allowed. And so genocide is okay. If we're not stopping it, 3 months later. And so I worry about how other conflicts will read this and say, oh, if Israel was able to do it, we will do it. And so obliterating and ethnically cleansing and doing collective punishment and all of that, if it goes unchecked by the international community, then it's going to be the new normal when there is conflict around us and anywhere else in the world. And so I really worry about that. And that's why the ICJ process is so important, to say to not only to us and to the Palestinian people and to Israel, but to say to the world that this is not okay and that you cannot persecute a war on children and have that left unchecked. And so I think that is very critical. And so we are, as Palestinians, and I'm wearing my Palestinian hat, very grateful for the South African initiative, and hoping that they will pass some provisional measures very soon to stop the onslaught and save lives.
The Global South is leading the way, and you are as well. Thank you so much for being with us today. We truly appreciate you both.
Thank you for listening to And Still We Rise, Uniting Women for Change. Together, Palestinian and American women can make a difference. I'm your co-host, Destiny Magnet, signing off from Boston.
And I'm Tamar Haddad, signing off from Jerusalem. For more information on Churches for Middle East Peace and our work, visit cmap.org. Here, you can find the latest news from the region, opportunities to get involved, and resources for contacting U.S. representatives about our core issues. See you next time!